Hi, everyone, and welcome to Spare a Thought, the podcast that shines a light on the people, ideas, issues, and organisations that are often overlooked or misrepresented in the media. My name is Tom Spare, your host. Since I started the show last October, I noticed the episodes focused on Wales have received a higher amount of interest and engagement. So I wanted to start a mini-series which will be dispersed through upcoming episodes focused on people and organisations based in Wales. For today's episode, I spoke with Lizzie Spikes, an artist who lives in West Wales and is the joint founder of Driftwood Designs, an Aberystwyth-based company who publish and produce a range of gifts, homewares, prints and cards. Together we talk about the role Wales plays in Lizzie's art, the importance of community and taking things slow when starting up an independent business, and how the business is navigating choppy economic waters. So let's get into it. This is Made in Wales, Driftwood Designs on Spare a Thought. Before we talk about art, creativity and running an independent business in Wales, I wanted to start with you. When you were having careers guidance at school, what did you say you wanted to do when you grew up? And then did you follow that career path or did you end up somewhere else?
I was one of the generation who did. They used to give us a special form and you had to tick boxes and then they put it through some supercomputer. I don't really know how this worked. And it told you what you could be. And I think it told me I should be a librarian, probably because I like books. But I'm not really good at being quiet. So I think I was immediately aware that wasn't a good idea. I think when I was that age, I wanted to be a journalist, oddly. I think I was very inspired by Press Pack, which was a drama series that was on when I was growing up. And I wanted to get into journalism until I heard a lot of stuff about, the negativity of journalism, and that changed my mind completely. And so I think, originally as a child, I think if you'd asked, I just said I wanted to be a journalist.
You're not the first guest who's talked about filling in a form and it going through a computer. One of my other guests, he did it at school and it was something random, like an antique dealer.
I also loved Lovejoy, so I probably would be quite down for that.
Yeah. A different career path. You could have been on, one of those sort of afternoon sort of like Flog It or something like that.
Yeah, I can imagine getting into that.
Feels quite, interesting. I'm now considering rethinking my own.
It was, I don't think they do it anymore, and it was a very odd way of trying to. Rather than just speaking to you, they put your details in and you tick boxes and it came up with an answer. But it's funny in retrospect.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it was just obviously it's very basic programming, and you have to be a bit suspicious of those things too. Are they just direct? Is it random or is it because it could be quite insidious, it's like putting people where they need to go sort of thing. In season 1 of Spare a Thought, I interviewed a creative writing facilitator, Bryony Goffin, on the theme of creative writing. So on the theme of sort of art, we talked about ideas, creativity and where inspiration comes from. Where do you go to get inspired? What's your sort of process when you want to create? Where do you go to get ideas?
This was probably the hardest bit, I think, about being someone who loved creating stuff as a teenager, and you come out of education and you're a bit like, right, okay, so it's like, what is that input? And I remember my first ever boss, he was the lovely eccentric guy with a big handlebar mustache, and he said it's like you have to think of yourself as an empty vessel. And as you go through experience in life, you will because I just used to, I've got no idea. I want to paint something, but, where do I get this? Where does this magical artistic inspiration come from? And that's something I have always struggled with, which is why when I did my degree, I kind of did half fine art and half scenographic design, because I found the literature was inspiring, and it gave me an input, which was something that I could then process and communicate in my own form, which was what I got enjoyment out of. So it's kind of, yeah, it's a tricky one. Whereas now I've got the confidence and the ability to just find things constantly that I want to communicate. I think, that's probably what it is for me. It's about trying to get stuff across to people, whatever that may be, whether it's the fact that I went for a walk and the foxgloves looked nice, or do you know what I mean? It's that kind of so there's no deep-seated, I don't know, inner turmoil, which I tapped into, which is what I was hoping for as a teenager, but it never happened.
I mean, that's quite an interesting way of sort of like realization that you were hoping for something deep and dark, and you thought actually just about it's experiential, it's about taking in what's around you, and
exactly that. And so it was because when you study fine art academically, that is what they want. They want you to have some deep-seated angst to express. I remember going through a phase of doing some very angsty self-portraits, which I would not want to see now. And it was definitely forced. It just wasn't me, it wasn't where I come from, really.
I mean, that's an interesting point that you say that when you were sort of starting in this world, that in art, in creating things, you didn't really know what to say, as in you didn't have anything to sort of draw on. And I feel the same way. So I do a lot of creative writing outside of my work. So I do this podcast, and then I work 3 days a week for an innovation agency, which is really cool because there's lots of very like interesting researchers and so many reports to look through. 3 days a week, I don't really have enough time to absorb all the great things my colleagues are doing. But as I've gotten older, my writing, I probably write less, but my writing is better.
Okay.
Because I'm able to go, I haven't got anything to prove to anyone.
Exactly that.
I just need to, if I've got an idea, I'll capture it and it might come to something.
And you don't take it too seriously, and you don't think about it too much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the more you can lower the stakes, I feel that it sort of frees your brain up a bit to go, I'll see where it goes, sort of thing.
Exactly that. I think it's that, and then you can play, and actually what people love is when they can pick up on that playing, because that's what it's all about, really.
So could you tell us about Driftwood Designs? Who did you set it up with? Where did you source your materials from? And where does it come in the timeline of when you started out, you wanted to be an artist, you wanted to be a creative? How far into that journey did Driftwood Design sort of appear?
Well, I got my degree in fine art and scenography, and then thought, which was so much fun, but then I wanted to live in rural Wales and have a family, and they don't really go together. It's like, okay, so I think I had Jacob, who's my eldest, who's now 20, and when he was about 4, I think I hooked up with Becky, who I'd known from when we were teenagers, and she'd been away studying media, I think, and she's very strong-headed and business-minded, and she came back to live around here, and she was like, "Oh, you're doing lots of painting, aren't you? Why don't you make cards?" Or I was like, "Oh no, I started I was painting on bits of driftwood that I picked up when I was out walking, and I started just putting them on eBay, and it was like, oh wow, people are actually buying these random things that I'm putting on eBay. And it was just a way of getting a little bit of extra money into the household, because it was Jacob was quite little and I wasn't able to work properly. And then so Beck came on board, and we started making cards and prints, and Driftwood Designs kind of evolved.
And which part of Wales are you in?
I'm in the countryside, but just outside Aberystwyth, which is on the west coast, like in the middle.
Okay, great. It is amazing what people sell on eBay. I'm always surprised. I really need to think of something like that, where I think I can someone finds this valuable, and I need to find those people. Basically, that's
Well, I was brought up by my dad. Made his living. He came to Aberystwyth Uni as well to study English literature, and then made his living foraging for moss that he took to London. So
Okay, again, very niche.
it comes from that kind of place. Or he used to pick special twigs for the florists and take it to London, driftwood bits.
Okay.
He just basically foraged and took little bits of Wales up to London, and in the end bought a forest.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know anyone who bought a forest. That's really good.
That's what happens. So I was kind of raised by someone who did make his living from randomness.
Yeah, randomness. Yeah. Okay. And so, what role do you think Wales has in your business? What part does Wales play in the way that you sort of run your business? Is it part of your business? Is it sort of part of its identity and your identity, would you say?
I sent Beck question 4 and 5 which are coming up, but it was what she had to say, which linked in very strongly. It's to do with a lot of our business is based about community, and our first community, the people who first started supporting us, were our local community, and the Welsh community then generally got on board, and we started doing shows and fairs in the Eisteddfod and the Royal Welsh and things like that. And there's such a good, strong, supportive network, and I think that that's what kind of made us able to grow. Really, it's there, and the Welsh language is something that has a really important part of it. I was brought up by English parents who'd moved to Wales to uni and were very aware that they wanted their 4 children to be fully bilingual and fully integrated into the community. So we went to the Welsh primary school. I did my A-levels through the medium of Welsh. I think because they'd come from outside like you, they properly appreciated it all. They just, they didn't take any of it for granted. We went to chapel. We went to Sunday school.
Okay, that was really fully ingrained into.
They introduced us into it, and the Welsh community accepted us, and it's brilliant. And that's the business has worked in the same way, I think.
I think that level of acceptance is an interesting one, because I was always, as I said, I arrived and then realised I was very English. But then I sort of made a bit of a joke of it in the fact that, I just always said, well, I'm the sort of bus replacement service that's come here. It's sort of like, and I think a lot of people found that relatively endearing. But also, you get swept up in when there's a rugby match or whatever. I mean, I always support Wales. It's just the thing that I've done relatively early on. And then also I'd sort of moved about different places, and I never really felt at home when I was growing up in Dover. Like, I had a lovely family and everything, but I never really felt like I belonged there. But here it feels a lot more welcoming, and people don't take themselves too seriously, which I think that's a really important
thing.
I think sometimes a lot of people in the southeast think they might be a bit more important than they actually are.
Do you think it's because they're pressured into a way of life where they have to take things more seriously? Because things, I don't know, you need to earn more money, you need to be more successful, because it's just whereas here we can afford to be a bit more relaxed and a bit more kind of, not to take things quite so seriously.
Yeah, that's probably a fairer representation of it. Maybe I'm being a bit too harsh on my ancestors, but for sure, and I just and then I worry a little bit when I see developments that are going on in Cardiff that takes away the old buildings and things get built up a bit, and there's less sort of independent shops and there's more sort of like chains and everything. I sort of feel like that character might be getting lost in this whole search for getting businesses.
I guess the homogenisation of it all, isn't it? I suppose. But I think there's actually I think that's kind of been here, and there's a backlash against it to some extent now, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's that. You look at our local towns, and the big the big brands did try and move in, and it was all exciting when we got our first escalator and stuff, but which was only about 5 years ago. But I think now that it's that we don't have enough money and enough people to sustain what they would want, so they are tending to leave, and it's left a bit of a void. And the high street is having to try and rediscover itself. But I think there is more. People just appreciate the little companies and the little bits and bobs, and the independence and the things that they can trace a lot more than they, that I think that whole thing about Costa. I think our Costa's actually gone now. Is kind of on its way out around here a little bit.
I wonder how much of that was driven by like the pandemic and a lot more people being at home and maybe appreciating their local area more. I don't know if there's any sort of link there. Because that was my hope from it, that I wanted people actually to appreciate their neighbours more, or where they are and their and their place in the world, perhaps. And perhaps it's not the worst thing in the world for your world to be a little bit smaller and a bit more local if there's a bit more connection there, rather than sort of gallivanting over all these places, taking a load of pictures and not really ever having connection to somewhere.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about there is massively important thing, and I think probably more so since the pandemic, that people had the time to kind of stop and notice what was going on a little bit, and to take the time to notice what was going on in the hedge up the hill. Or do you mean, rather than it just being, oh right, I'm going off, I'm going to run up Snowdon and
yeah. I've got this to-do list of I need to sort of do life rather than live it. I think
it does seem to have changed people a little bit in a good way.
Yeah. I mean, I try to stay positive because there's also a lot of negative things that have come from the pandemic. But
yes, yeah.
But yeah, okay. And also talking about like the world as it is and the uncertainty, world events, which is causing tremendous amounts of uncertainty economically, which makes it incredibly challenging to run a business. What are the challenges for running your business? What are the risks, and indeed, what are the rewards of the business that you run?
And this is the question I sent to Beck, because I could say actually I basically get to not have to worry about most things, because she's just I'm one of those people who tries not to watch the news. I grew up with Radio 4 playing in the background constantly, and I just found over Brexit and the pandemic that I just couldn't bear it anymore. So I listen to audiobooks and try and ignore the world as much as possible. So I sent this to Beck, and she said that basically we're very lucky in that we grew our business in a very organic way. So we didn't kind of have this big business idea, borrow and invest loads of money and then just hope. We kind of tried stuff and tested stuff and then grew customer base. We've never borrowed money. We've only ever used money as we made it. So, in that way, we're quite sheltered from a lot of the risks and the kind of, we don't have to, we get the knock on of things like the cost of things going up. And that's something that we kind of struggle with a little bit, because then we have to kind of factor them in and pass them on. But sure, there's also, we've got a community of people who make stuff for us. Everything that we manufacture is manufactured in the UK, which was something that isn't quite important. And then we manage, we can shop around between our manufacturers because we've been doing it for a long time. So I think her feedback was that we're lucky enough to be quite a steady ship, because we haven't, this whole thing about being trendy and drop shipping and selling hundreds of things. And, we're completely the opposite of that. We've grown very slowly. We've got a good core customer base, and we just kind of trundle along.
Yeah, it seems like a sensible approach, and I suppose it sort of reflects. I mean, I've been along to sessions about very dry sessions often about why isn't Wales's economy growing? Why isn't it more dynamic? There's a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises and businesses, but we need sort of whatever. But I don't know. I just think your approach seems a bit more sensible, because it's rooted in not being too ambitious. It's rooted in sort of steadiness and, within your means. The business setup that you guys have is that you're sort of opposites in the way that you approach things, I guess. But also then you complement one another, because you're sort of like yin and yang in the sense of like the business person, the creative person, and so on.
No, we have common ground. So we have we have very separate aspects to the bit, but then, when it comes to product design, we'll both be involved. When it comes to, working out pricing on things, we'll both be involved. But yeah, it works really well. I think we're just incredibly lucky that we just one of those things. And right, you're right, it's the yin and the yang.
And so, like, thinking about the what it takes to run a business, I guess, thinking about those risks, and setting up a business can be a big change for people, particularly if, like, people like me, I've pretty much always had an office job. So there's always been like a structure. I ask permission to get, annual leave, or, there's all these other things, this structure around it. Do you have any advice for people wanting to start up their own business?
That was one of my main, I did have a proper job in between uni and having Jacob. And one of my main bugbears was I had to fill in a form to get permission to have a week of my life. And I was like, no, this is so wrong. I can't do it. I think I'm quite risk averse. I'm one of the, Beck's braver than me, but we do everything that we do. We calculate it and we work it out and we think it through. And we look at the worst case scenarios and we're careful, I think. And, and with the never borrowing money thing, it's kind of like, it's all within our means. It's all kind of carefully, we're definitely not risk takers. But I think, I suppose, don't expect overnight success would be my thing. It's slow and steady. Do you know what I mean? Just little increments of, grow things within a way that you can cope with, that it doesn't matter if one thing doesn't work because you can try something else. It's just, organic and not trying to, I don't know, have magical overnight success, because I don't think that's how the world works, really. And if it does, then it kind of maybe isn't built on proper foundations and it might fall down.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Something that burns incredibly brightly, ultimately, if, what goes up must come down in the sense of, very quick ascension. And I mean, my background, I've worked in higher education for a long time, worked in universities for 10 years, and they are very slow moving beasts. Very fast paced world. And this is what we're seeing now, is a lot of universities haven't been managed financially very well, and the governance has been a bit iffy, and there's probably not enough accountability, particularly for big decision makers. But then there's often people that just want to come in and just sweep it all away, and try and get reform in and, change everything. But I'm of the opinion that incrementalism is very important, that yes, there are times when you have to be reactive to, and proactive, make sure that you're more resilient. But just no decision I've ever made on a whim has ever really gone very well.
No, exactly that. It's the lack of whim.
Less whim.
And a lot of panic. And just, slow and just kind of considered.
And what are the rewards of doing that business together, but also like your output and, the interactions that you have? What are the rewards of running a small business, would you say?
Again, it's the community thing. It's that kind of, we've got, especially Beck's very involved with like the business club and things like this, they kind of get together, and it's just talking, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah, they discuss things, they talk things through. It's that thing that, if you work on your own, a lot of that's missing, especially if you're working in a high tower, pressing buttons on a keyboard. That's not there, is it? But I think, it's good. And even for me, the social media side of it, although I moan about it, we still use Facebook quite a lot, even though it's it's probably old hat now, isn't it, compared to the TikTok and things like that. But it's really interactive. It's a positive interactive thing. It's like, people tell you what they've been doing, or, I posted that I heard the curlews while I was out walking my dog yesterday. And the amount of, people saying, oh, well, I've heard the curlew, or, it's just brilliant. I love it. It's good.
Yeah, and I think Facebook's gone through all these various different sort of iterations, and different folks will use it in different ways. And I know loads of people who use it for marketplace, for example, where they get a lot of like second stuff, and I've had I pop on every so often, and I don't really sort of interact with it as much anymore. It's more Instagram, and I don't do TikTok really. And a lot of the videos I find on Instagram, I'll share it with my friends, and I'll say, well, yeah, I've seen this like 3 weeks ago on TikTok. No, that's fine.
You'll be fine the time.
Yeah, exactly. I'm accepting it now. I'm never going to be a TikTok person. But the interesting thing is like things about local businesses will pop up, about community, and also a lot like to do with like tickets for music events and stuff like that. And so I think it has its place still, and it gets a bad rep, I guess, because of the own it, and the ethics behind it all. But
I think if you start looking at all that, then it is and it force for negative. But if you kind of like say I painted full moons, and it turned into this big thing now where the Americans love the full moon names, and it's just like every month everyone's like, they post all their pictures of their full moons that they can see. It's just I really like it.
That's cool. Yeah. I think that's where social media should be. It's about making connection and making connection with people that you would not ordinarily be connected with, people all over the world, or or different parts of the country. As a sort of final question, a core part of Driftwood Designs' mission is to bring art into people's everyday lives through accessible products and bringing artistry to them. Why do you believe that's important for people to engage in art in that way, would you say?
I suppose I did try and think this one through. I think for me, art is like a language. Different artists have different languages, basically, don't they? And I think I discovered that my language is something that other people find easy to understand or to kind of connect with, and I've never wanted it to be something that was on a gallery wall that only some people can afford to look at, the time to go and see it, or the money to own it. Or it felt like something that I wanted, if I'd wanted it, to be able to afford it myself, basically. I suppose it's that idea that if someone's got a beautiful lampshade, and even if just like every now and then they look at a little patch of it and it communicates with them, then that's kind of, I know that's a positive for me, and that's what I want people to have. And even if it just gives them that moment of, oh yeah, I like that colour against that, it's just that's what I like.
And I guess that answers the last thing as well, about what you want people to feel when they encounter a piece of your art or buy one of your products, is they have something that makes them feel good, but not in a sort of like transactional way. I guess it's something that they now own. Nourishing.
Yeah. It's like I like that, it just brings a little bit of joy, or it's just that for me is a positive.
But it's been great chatting to you, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. I think what you're doing is brilliant. I'm glad that you have had such a positive experience of moving to Wales, and that it's brilliant. You've taken it all and just go because sometimes I think fresh eyes, like I was saying about my parents, they just, they always remember to stop and look at the sunsets and the landscapes, and, taught us to have our eyes wide open to it all.
A big thank you to Lizzie for being my guest today. I thoroughly enjoyed our chat together. In the show notes, you'll find a link to the Driftwood Designs website, as well as a link to Spare a Thought Instagram and my Substack. The title track for this show is Young Shall Grow. Credit and thanks to Afrocluster, Magugu and Asha Jane. The show was researched, written and edited by me, Tom Spare. This has been a Be The Change Media Network production. Thanks for listening.
Whether you like them or not, young shall grow. Better fill them with love. Them to know. In this life you don't give up.